Hi there, business owners, directors, and marketeers. In today's show, I'm meeting Brian Roizen from Feedonomics. He is a co-founder and the chief architect. With that, welcome to the show, Brian.
Thanks so much, Simon. Really excited and happy to be here.
It's great to have you. So maybe before we really dive in, tell us a little bit about yourself, your role at Feedonomics, and what is it all about? What do you do at Feedonomics?
Yeah, absolutely. So we got started about 5.5 years ago. And I think of everyone at Feedonomics, I've probably done and worn the most hats. So when we first got started, I actually helped build the platform along with my brother. I've done everything from marketing it to selling it to building up our marketing team as well as our sales team, and also one of the founders. So yeah, it's been an awesome ride. And what Feedonomics does is we combine best-in-class technology and service to list your products. So we work mostly with online retailers to help list products everywhere where people shop online. So that includes channels like Google Shopping, Amazon, Facebook, and Instagram. I sometimes make the joke that we help get the product data over to anywhere where you see products. So all those annoying ads that follow you around, sorry about that. And we also work with many of the world's most prolific advertising agencies, brands, and retailers, including over 30% of the top 1,000 internet retailers.
Awesome. Great. So thank you for letting us know whom we have to play moving forward if we see ads that follow us across the web. Jokes aside, no, that's great. As you said, you basically wore a lot of hats within Feedonomics or during your time at Feedonomics. Before we basically started the interview, you already told me that you were basically bootstrapped. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about what changed between back when you started the company and where you are right now from a company and from a personal level.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think bootstrapped is definitely the right word for it. So we started 5.5 years ago with zero funding, zero venture capital, no private equity. So the whole thing was self-funded and bootstrapped. We basically didn't take money for a very long time, didn't pay ourselves anything. But that also meant we had to be incredibly deliberate about every dollar that we spent. And personally, from when we started, as I mentioned, I've worn many hats. So not only am I a software engineer and actually help build the technology and the platform, but I was actually one of the first people to use what we created, which is, in Silicon Valley speak, eating your own dog food, which is very, very important because it helped me in my journey to be in charge of our whole marketing team, which, in understanding the why of the users, the user journey, what they actually want to do with our product. It really helps you not just sell it, but also market to people who might be interested. So we had to understand very intimately the why behind what we were selling. And in terms of marketing specifically, and I think that's an interesting one too. We actually created a team, and it was kind of my skunkworks project to create a team that we call our growth engineering team. Which is responsible for not just our growth externally, but also our growth internally. And that's an interesting one because not only are we doing marketing, all the normal things you would imagine like social media, paid ads, SEO, organic content, and referrals and partnerships, but we actually also even do things like ordering snacks for the office, putting on internal events and parties, and making sure that people are happy. And that's a really cool component of what we do. So it's kind of cool how we do not just external marketing, but also internal marketing too.
So maybe one question on that, like how many people are you now in the marketing and sales team? As you said, you were basically the first guy doing both things. So how many of you are there now?
Yeah, so on our marketing team, our growth engineering team, we actually have 10 people now, which is crazy to see it go from 1 to 10. And on our sales team, we now have about 15 people total, from external salespeople doing completely new sales to internal account managers.
Awesome. That's great. Cool. I mean, from that, I think that's probably a good path to the next question in sense of how do your customers actually find you? How do they get in touch with your sales team? Like, what's the channels that you use most to acquire net new customers for your business?
Yeah, in general, we have quite a few different ways of making sure that customers find us. I think from the moment when we first started, we've been creating amazing blog content. So organic traffic for us is one of the biggest. We of course, wrote amazing articles, and I'm not just trying to toot my own horn, but when we first started, I was the one writing everything. And so what I did was when I had a challenge with a specific task, I would literally write an article on how to solve it. So, if I had trouble getting my products over to Amazon or to Google Shopping, I would write an article about that exact issue I faced. And sure enough, I'm not the only person in the world who had that problem, but you couldn't find any answers for stuff like that. So it was incredible to be creating this kind of organic content.
Awesome.
We've of course, done things like Google, Microsoft ads, running on very specific keyword targeting. And we have a really big social media presence as well. So we're constantly promoting on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn too. So what's kind of interesting though is I mentioned like these channels about customers finding us, but over the last couple of years, what has happened is the biggest way that customers find us is now by word of mouth. And this is kind of an awesome one because when we first got started, I would say the word Feedonomics and it sounded foreign to me, right? It was like, what does it mean? I hadn't heard it from anyone else before. But after a while, we saw that search terms were changing to branded searches. So people were searching for Feedonomics. And that's one of our best performing terms, which, how does someone know to randomly type that combination of letters? It's because
Absolutely,
they hear
yeah.
about it or read about it. And so the best thing that we can do and what we found to be amazing is just doing an amazing job for our clients, making sure they're happy. And the marketing community is not that big. Like it's not hundreds of millions of people. It's not like a Netflix consumer play. It's maybe like 100,000 to 200 people worldwide. So our
Absolutely, yeah.
emphasis has been on really trying to reach those people, but through word of mouth, because even though it's funny, right? We're an online business, and yet the best possible marketing for us is actually doing a great job for clients and having them expand our reach through word of mouth.
But actually, I think one point that you made, which links up nicely with that, is you said before you have to eat your own dog food, right? So what you basically did is you wrote the articles online of the blog posts that helped the people looking for those answers. So you tested it yourself, it didn't work, you figured out a way to make it work, shared it, which in the end got you the traffic.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
If you want to see it like that, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, from there, right? Obviously, until you got to that specific point, I would assume you faced a lot of other challenges. Are there any specific challenges that you could describe that businesses face, like businesses like Feedonomics when they grow online? Like, what are the typical ones that you come across?
Yeah, I would say that we are not that unique in the challenges that a fast-growing company faces. I think the biggest ones are because we're not VC funded. We don't have millions of dollars to throw at growing pains. Like any company that's growing is going to have some pretty common challenges. Like when one department does a really good job, it creates all sorts of problems downstream. And it's a funny problem to have, but the way I think about it is almost like an engineering problem where if you have a factory and you have someone, looking at all the things coming out, if all of a sudden there's too many things coming out on the conveyor belt, they can't properly do their job. But it is a good problem to have in some ways because it means you're producing more, right? Yeah. So a good analogy, I guess, beyond that and maybe more directly applicable to us is if marketing does a really good job and creates too many leads, the salespeople, that's their dream scenario, right? But the problem is they may not have enough time to spend on those leads to do a great job. So something might slip through the cracks, or put another way, if the sales team closes too many leads, now our operations team, is basically saying that's great, but we don't have enough people to handle all that. So I think especially when you're small, these are, and by small, I'm not saying we're big or by any means, but when you get more of a sample size, you get to better understand the operational side of things and create better processes and systems and just have more capacity. Like we didn't have millions of dollars to hire people like 2 years in advance for a position we didn't even know existed. So that I think that's a really common one that businesses face. I think it's probably significantly easier to face if you have a ton of money sitting in the bank. But I think on the other hand, you might invest it in the wrong places too early, which is why I love how we got to where we are by being very deliberate and focused in those decisions. But
Right. So just quickly on that, I mean, you said, okay, it's really hard to foresee where you might fall short. What's your recommendation then for companies that might be in a situation that they're actually fortunate to have enough leads and the sales team is bang on and closes those leads? What then? How do you handle this influx of customers? Or how did you manage that?
Yeah, to be totally transparent, it's a very difficult problem. I would say that in the last couple of years, we've had to have like a work weekend where, not just our employees, but also the founders, rolled up our sleeves and spent time during some of these more stressful growing pains to just get the job done. Because the biggest thing for us is not to leave a client on the lurch and leave them unhappy. We care so much about the client experience. So we had to work through it, honestly, and put in better protections to ensure that we didn't have that in the future.
Sounds like a lot of coffee throughout the nights. All right.
Yep. We used to have 3 coffee machines, 3 Keurigs. Now we just have 1 really good coffee machine. So even our coffee machine cycle has evolved.
That's great that you got more efficient. That's great. Look, Brian, as we basically just touched the marketing and sales funnel, right? And the challenge that you can basically have with too many leads. How did you actually, without giving too much away, structure your marketing and sales funnel? How does it look right now? So if I would come to your website, for example, like what will happen with me?
Yeah, great question. I think it's we designed it not just for people who type in Feedonomics.com, but in general, we structured it like an upside down pyramid, which from what I've read, I didn't study marketing in school. It's just through creating, 10 different businesses since I was a kid, really ended up at the same place, which was you want to start with people at the very top of that funnel who, may, and I'll give you the example with us, like they may want to advertise on Amazon or Google or Facebook. So they don't necessarily know, like, what is a feed system, right? Most people, if you ask them, do you know what a feed optimization platform is? They'll be like, what? Even if they're in marketing, they won't necessarily know, but they know that they have a specific problem. And so you want to give them advice that may be tangential to what they're trying to achieve. Like they might type into Google, how do I get my products on Amazon? And so that would be our article title, right? And then the body of it would be, here are the steps you need to do it. And we're not trying to sell them. We're not trying to be like request demo, request demo, request demo, and not give any information. We're actually trying to educate them. That page may not even have a request demo button, like, in 5 different places with call to actions. But if they see the value in the website, they're going to bookmark it. They're going to come back. They might see it a few more times before they realize, I need a feed system. And so we'll often give them advice on how to do something manually without even a feed system. And then eventually, as they get further and further down in that funnel, we'll, of course, try to target them multiple times along that purchase journey. But in principle, I think part of why we've been successful is because we want to try to educate them first before we actually even try to sell them something.
Gotcha. So the website is still the main purpose of the website is obviously then still the client generation, right? So getting them on the website from various sources, if it now referral, search, or paid advertisement, as you described before. And the primary goals on your website, depending on where the person is in the buying cycle and this buying decision would be to basically guide them to relevant blog posts, provide further information, and after a while, getting them to sign up for a demo. Is that more or less what I hear?
Yep, that's exactly right.
Great. So maybe just to go into that a little bit further, how would you actually know, or how do you track this internally, and how do you then improve, for example, the conversion rate within Feedonomics? Because obviously in the end, you want to get them to sign up, leave some contact information, so sales, your inbound team, can potentially follow up with them, right?
Yep, exactly. So it's an interesting question, like how do you track and that entire conversion rate process? So there are many ways to do it. I think we've learned over the last 5.5 years that there are probably more ways to do this incorrectly than to do it correctly. So what we do is we try to look at the full cycle, not just optimizing for more leads. Like we've made that mistake in the past. The problem is you can get more leads with an increased conversion rate, but if you're not optimizing for quality, you're missing the boat. Like you're going to get the sales team to not be happy with the people they're giving demos to because they're not of quality, or they might be tangentially related, but not at that right part in the purchase process. So what we do is we do run many different A/B tests leveraging Google Analytics, as well as our CRM that we use for sales and marketing, which is HubSpot, to see how can we get the ultimate outcome, which is high quality leads. Not just necessarily lead counts. And of course, we have more segmentation that I'm not going to get into here about how we actually segment, those groups of like enterprise versus SMB versus all sorts of interesting client types that we have. So it's amazing to see, like changing the button color can definitely account for a huge conversion rate improvement. It's insane. Okay. Like we've seen huge improvements in something like that, but also constantly tweaking our messaging, not just necessarily even on the website, but in the email we send after a prospect sends out fills out the contact form. So there are a lot of interesting client-facing processes that they're not even necessarily seeing before they until that point after they fill out the contact form. And so you want to do as many control tests as possible, but I'll give you another example. Like it's very difficult to do that over the holiday period because if you imagine like the volume and everything is very different. For a retailer during Q4, this is like the most critical time for them. Usually 50% of their sales are happening in just a couple of months. So their sense of urgency is significantly higher. And so sometimes there are certain tweaks you can do to help get them into the right track as well.
Awesome. Oh, that's very insightful. And I think for every SaaS business, not even for your business, seasonality is a big challenge.
Yep.
For us, it was always Q4, end of year. So definitely. One question that's more specific about Feedonomics, and because we talked about this previously, right? You mentioned obviously that you started your company in the US, and then you started to expand. So I thought maybe you can give us some insight of like what are the challenges that you faced when you grew your company globally, because I think that's always something every company wants to get to in the long term. So maybe you have some insight on that as well.
Yeah, it's an interesting question because that's the dream of every business, right? You're in a particular market and you see that, you have some percentage of that market, but you're not in any other country and they all would need the same services that you provide. For us, it was, we decided to be focused on the US for a very long time. Partly because we're not a VC-funded company, we couldn't just open up offices in 30 different countries, on day one, or even in year one, or year two, or year three. So we did it very slowly and with a focused effort. I'll give you the example with the UK, for example. So we had we had a very large client there who really needed dedicated service and support in their time zone. And for us, we're a 24/7 company. Like, we have people around the world now who can answer questions. They can help clients when they need it. But the problem was they needed like dedicated support, and we didn't have anyone on the ground in London to help them. So we had two people in our LA office who are amazing. They both love Harry Potter, and so we gave them a deal like, do you want to go work for us in the UK? And they kind of spearheaded, without building an office of 20 people immediately, spearheaded this and proved it out. This client is still with us today. They have an amazing testimonial on our website,
Awesome.
actually. And it's a really cool case where you want to do something, test the waters. Don't, spend millions of dollars in trying to expand globally before you really prove it out. And I know that we have competitors who have tried that and it doesn't work. Like, we've talked to clients in other countries who have major problems because they just didn't really enter it knowing everything that they should have done if they properly tested it. So it's an interesting one. My recommendation there is to just always test. So the other thing I think we've seen is that some countries require an in-person meeting to be successful. So the way that people do business in the UK versus France versus US is very different. Sometimes, like what we've seen in France, is they only want to do business with a French company. So if you're, pitching them in a totally separate time zone, it's probably not going to be successful. So there are a lot of things that we've learned over the last couple of years that have helped us do that. But yeah, we now have a truly global presence in several countries, and of course we'll expand into other ones, but always do it slowly and deliberately so you can test it and see how it performs.
Absolutely. Yeah, this always makes me laugh a little bit as I'm German myself, and we are a particular bunch of people, not necessarily very American in how we buy software and build partnerships, I guess. So we're slowly coming to the end of today's interview. So thanks for all the insights so far. Before we basically call it a day, I have two more questions for you. This one I like a lot because I usually get very interesting insights from people. So what advice would you give yourself if you would restart your business today?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And the other one that I've sometimes been asked is like, what would you do differently if you could, start over, right?
Yeah.
And my answer to that is usually nothing. I would almost not want to know where we are today, because every single possible thing we did along the way resulted in a learning. We love doing root cause analysis. I think it's because we have that engineering kind of mindset of problem solving. So understanding the why something happened and how to put in steps to make sure it doesn't happen again are key. And I think that why is huge. Like, a root cause is obviously great, but I think for us, understanding the why and always try to get to that why helps steer you in the right direction. So for us, it was knowing the customer perspective because we lived it. Before we founded Feedonomics, like, we were doing the same thing that our customers were doing. We were using these antiquated feed systems that were built in the early 2000s that were incredibly slow, had terrible support. And so we knew what the pain points were from a marketing, from a sales perspective, but also from a perspective of what do we want to build. So I think that why is the key thing that I would, impress upon anyone listening to always look for in everything you do. And that's the advice I would have for myself if, I could travel back in time and and give it to myself.
So I hope someone who is looking for a job at Feedonomics listen to that part very closely if they face an interview. Good. So the last question then from my side. Tell us one thing basically that we should remember about you and Feedonomics, and how can we get in touch if we're interested in you and in a feed optimization system?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're an e-commerce store and you need help in getting your products on multiple different advertising channels, or you just have really messy data and you need help in cleaning it up, even if you're not in e-commerce, we can definitely help. You can reach out to us on our contact form on our website by requesting a demo, or just reach out to hello@feedonomics.com or brian@feedonomics.com. I'm happy to help too. We
Awesome.
also have a really cool tool that lets you analyze your data. So we'd love to, run an analysis for you. But yeah, thanks so much, Simon, for hosting this. This was awesome.
Great. Thanks very much for joining today. It was really great to have you, Brian.
Likewise. Thanks again.